So penitentiary, flour mill or granary. For 3 years it ran as that flour mill. So they did attempt to grow wheat down here. It's the wrong area, wrong geological climate. They started to grow it in Sorel, Richmond area, and they would import it down, but it became too expensive for that. After 3 years it closed down. 3 months of a year we get enough rainfall that it moves that tread wheel by water, and that grinds the wheat down. But the other 9 months it becomes a convict's punishment to be sentenced to a minimum 3 hours on a tread wheel grinding the wheat. Religion to preach there. There was that many different denominations and religions here. They decided to create that place of worship. So about 1,100 people could be seated in that church. They would divide, obviously, free people from convicts. They would still share it at the same time. Soldiers around the walls keeping an eye on that congregation. Convicts were about 900 in number and about 200 civilians. They were convicts, they were criminals, they were still dedicated to their religion. But if they didn't have a religion, they were told to pick one because it was going to help in your reforming. So a couple of the funnier crimes were people laughing and talking during divine service. One man was actually caught crawling around under the pews trying to sell his little goods that he'd made during the week in the workshop to get a little bit of extra money for the black market as well. Convicts and soldiers. There is a bluestone wall along the back there. That's where the A-frames are lined up. There's a cream coloured building back through the trees there. It was the police station of the Carnarvon period. That's also where those solitary confinement cells were too, where they could be in there for a few hours, a couple of days, a week. Rations reduced down to bread and water. I'm going to point out a couple of other buildings you can visit. So you can go into the parsonage. You can find out more between Durham and Booth. See photos and plans of the church. Find out about the tourism side of things as well at Port Arthur.
Last week. Oh, me too. Yeah, it was long ago. Yeah. The result I just saw last.
Hey guys, you're welcome to come aboard. Don't need a seat ticket. Just need to check yourselves in to the vessel at some point. There's more QR codes on board. Use the hand sanitizer provided. Check this out.
Thanks, mate. Which were described as being 150 feet to the first branch.
produced anything from broomsticks to boats and ships. And this clearing we're coming alongside on your left-hand side is the dockyard, where they produced around 200 vessels altogether. The majority of these were longboats or whale boats. Whaling was a major industry in this early colony of Van Diemen's Land, so you can imagine a craft like that being in big demand, and ships would travel from all over the world to hunt in these very fertile waters. A longboat is a very similar craft, but they were used to transport goods and personnel around the bays and inlets of this early colony when travel across country was often quite difficult, if not totally impossible. But they built larger ships as well. The largest ship built at Port Arthur was 286 tons. She was also the largest ship built in the colony at that point in time. What you can see sitting in one of the old slipways is an artist's sculptural representation of one of those craft under construction. But the operation at the dockyard was fairly independent of the rest of Port Arthur. They had their own blacksmith shops where they could make their own metal fittings and fastenings. They had their own saw pits. They used to use steamers. Steamers allowed the timbers to be heated up, excellent climbing so they could be made to the appropriate shapes. At the back of that complex was a big shed where they used to cut and sew the canvas sails as well as make up the rigging. And of course all of this was under the watchful eye of a master shipwright, the first being John Watson and later David Hoy, who spoke about White Weatherboard building, the only surviving wooden buildings in Port Arthur. It's a time in history when not many people could swim, and there was always a lot of activity on or around water. If somebody fell into the water, even people around them may not be able to assist them. Respiratory diseases affected convicts here. Tuberculosis affected convict and free person alike. They called it cancer. Now we'll have you back on shore shortly, folks. And on behalf of crew and captain, I wish you an interesting and pleasant day. Thank you.
Was only put up about 20 years ago on the 150th anniversary of his death, and it was erected by the Australian Writers Guild because Sabri, who died here as a convict, was Australia's first published author. And it's quite a remarkable story because he is so unlike most of the rest of the convicts that are sent out here, who are typically the men buried here, lower socio-economic groups, very poor literacy levels, whereas he comes from a very wealthy family of industrialists, fluid writer, loved writing, but he was not a good businessman. What I'm looking at is this stone, Redmond Mattus, particularly the word Mattus, M-A-T-U-S. So, can everybody see that? Anybody not see it? Okay. Above those letters, T-U-S, there are 3 small vertical strokes. Bang, 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 if you can see those. Okay, so what's happened here? As I said, all these stones are cut by convicts. The literacy rates are very low. There's mistakes on pretty much every stone. Spelling, punctuation, grammar. You'd be very hard pressed to find one that's not. This 8-month-old child who died here of tuberculosis, Redmond Matthias was his real name according to the death records. It's a different spelling, and that misspelling was actually finally picked up by the supervisor here, as the story goes, and he said to the stonemason, "You've left out 3 letters of the name," which is not uncommon here. He says, "Put the 3 back." So what he's done is he's put those 3 little indicator strokes there, which, if you're not familiar with the story, tells you nothing. But that was just one of those approaches back in the day. Tombs like this, not uncommon for the slightly more well-heeled, I suppose you'd say. First question for most people is, where does the body lie in these tombs? That's a very common one, and it's a fair question. Typically what they did here is they would dig out a conventional grave and they line the grave with convict bricks, and you see the tops of those on some of these other ones here. The coffin then goes in, everything's covered up, and then over the top here we just have this space. It's just air up in there. George was a reverend here for a long time, and he was a well-regarded chap, and he lived and died in the parsonage next door to the church. What happened with George was he was rather ill. One night he was up there in bed and he had flu-like symptoms. He got called out of his bed to attend to a dying man on the other side of the peninsula. So he goes out on horseback. It's a miserable night. He doesn't arrive back until late the next day, and he's in a bad way. He basically gets back to bed, develops pneumonia, and passes away. George was a very large man. We've got photographs of George. We could barely fit him in a photograph. So when he died upstairs in that house, all those homes had very tiny little, very tight little steps. In fact, they're all locked off now because people keep falling off. So you imagine doing what they did, taking a coffin up there, trying to put a very large man in it and get it back down the steps, and they just couldn't. So in the end, they had to take out all of the windows, or the main sets of windows upstairs. They got ropes and pulleys, they lowered the coffin down outside the building. It became a town spectacle, fairly undignified. And finally they brought him out by whaleboat to here. And where they have positioned him is in this very prominent place where they're saying he's overlooking his flock, keeping an eye on everybody here. This grave was used to be in absolutely stunning condition. There's a bloke who's about 90 now who used to be a tour guide here in the 1950s. I catch up with him once a year. He comes out here to Port Arthur on the quietest day of the year to reminisce. That's AFL Grand Final day, by the way. And he came out here a couple of years ago and was talking about this grave, and he used to be a guy in the 1950s. He said it was the most beautifully maintained plot. It had white picket fence, flowers, garden, it was all weeded. It was quite sad to see this it is, but that's very much the approach here at the moment. So.
Oh, there's a pig. Maybe this area was a farm area. Kernel or color? Color. Color soja.
Sorry. Yep.
Is this place for convict or for the soldier?
Both.
Is it this building?
Yeah, the hospital.
Oh, hospital, okay. I think the base level just for the convict. Oh.
Like a hop. How do you say that? Hop like. It's the governor's garden, right? Or something, someone's garden.